Okay. The next presentation is from Grid 2020. The title of the presentation is Grid-Wide Fire Spy, Making the Grid Our Wildlife Mitigation Ally. Alan Snook is the president. He's co-founder and president of Grid 2020 since 2011. Under Alan's leadership, the company is now transitioning toward public safety protection solutions. Okay, I see the screen's up there, and take it away, Alan.
All right, thank you, Randy. I appreciate that. And everyone, hello. Thank you for attending this session entitled Grid-Wide Fire Spy, Making the Grid Our Wildfire Mitigation Ally. Rather than wildlife, which is an interesting one, Randy, although we'll have to consider that for the future. But let's focus on wildfires today.
Did I say that incorrect?
Hey, that's okay.
Wildfire.
You're human like I am. We're all good here. It's all good. So, yeah, no problem at all.
My apologies.
So,
you can see it right on the screen there. It says wildfire.
Yeah, we're all good.
Okay.
So, in essence, everyone, throughout the last several years in particular, wildfires have admittedly gripped and even commanded our attention, and quite frankly, rightfully so. And it's our company's view that there will be multiple innovative solutions that are going to be entered into the marketplace, of course, to try to address the wildfire mitigation challenge. But for the purpose of this session today, I'm here to describe Grid-Wide Fire Spy, which is a specially designed suite of sensors that will provide always-on 24/7, 365 outdoor monitoring canopies strategically deployed throughout our at-risk communities. So we will be using the existing overhead distribution transformer fleet, which is ubiquitously deployed. We'll be leveraging the height of these overhead transformers to deploy these specially designed sensors to ultimately create a novel wildfire mitigation and public safety solution. The grid-wide, Fire Spy solution is literally built on top of our legacy patented time and field proven advanced transformer infrastructure technology. So we've in essence extended our legacy technology by adding additional sensing features, which I'll describe here today. But before we get into the solution itself, I think it's really important that we level set on the real problem. And that is, of course, wildfires. So let me see if I can get some things out of the way here. Let's drop that. I'm trying to move some items. So in our view, the historical basis of our wildfire mitigation strategy has to a great degree been based on hope. And in this regard, it's been based on hope in the sense of hoping that someone would even see a wildfire early enough in the process. And that if they did, that we would hope that they would report that wildfire accurately. We've continued to hope that dynamic weather conditions would not spawn or accelerate wildfires, and yet they continue to do that. We hope that first responders will be able to report vital situational awareness intelligence, but oftentimes they can't. We hope that already aging, overburdened grid assets will not fail and cause more fires, and yet they do. And we've hoped that increased vegetation management will prevent wildfire devastation. But at the end of the day, the bad news literally just keeps coming. You don't have to look far, you don't have to look hard to find countless headlines regarding wildfire devastation, from carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas emissions, to record-setting fires destroying homes by the hundreds and even sometimes larger numbers than that, to millions of acres being destroyed, of course, to unfortunate injuries and fatalities resulting. It's an unbelievable situation. And I'm afraid this little bar up here on top is hiding some things. But in February, the West mega drought was released by a reporter in a CNN article that I had read. That was in February, and 30 days later, Texas was on fire. And after Texas was on fire, shortly thereafter, I should say, we had New Mexico on fire, we have Arizona on fire, and surely most of you may have heard that just last week in an affluent residential community in California, we had yet another wildfire incident. Looks like we're picking up. Let's get some people out of the way here. There we go. All right. So we've come across, and I'm trying to find a way to get rid of this. Can't find a place to hide that. Hang tight here, gang. I'm reorganizing. All right, maybe that'll help. We've come across this map produced by a nonprofit organization called First Street Foundation. Apparently their history is primarily to be forecasting flood issues for the future. And they've since apparently added wildfire forecasting to their repertoire. And I saw actually two different maps, this being the one associated with moderate risk as is labeled here. And then subsequently, I did see a separate map for major risk. I've only chosen to do one here today. But I found it quite astonishing that according to these folks, beginning now, 2022, for the next 30 years, it is their forecast that given climate change conditions and et cetera, I'll leave it at that, there are now at least 80 million US properties that will be in some level of wildfire devastation risk throughout this 30-year upcoming period that's in front of us. Of that 80 million, 20.2 million units, or I'm sorry, properties will be classified as moderate risk, 6 million in the major risk category. And to me, quite astonishing, 1.5 million properties now being classified as falling into an extreme risk of wildfire devastation throughout this next 30-year window. You can see the states in particular that have been categorized under the moderate and the major risk. And you'll happen likely to notice that California, Texas, and Florida, for better or worse, has fallen into both of these areas of risk categorization. So let's see here. So at the end of the day, the bottom line is worst case scenarios just keep on coming. Once upon a time, we'd have a worst case scenario and say, gosh, thank goodness that's over. And then we'd never see it again. But as year after year is proving, we just simply aren't seeing a worst case scenario. We're seeing worst case repetitive scenarios. And as I just shared, we've got now a 30-year forecast in front of us that unfortunately just doesn't look a whole lot better. So regardless of what your measure, your metric, if you will, for determining the degree and pain associated with wildfires, it can be structures destroyed, thousands or tens of thousands of evacuees, and all the problems that event will create, out to acres, of course, being destroyed, to injuries and fatalities, and even to the monetary side. I think really that's a key point here, is that wildfire costs literally are now measured in the billions of dollars on an annual basis. So to put that into perspective, take a look at the last 5 years. In the US alone, wildfire damages are ranging annually between $50 and over $100 billion in the United States. That includes fire suppression, wildfire rehabilitation post-event, of course, and associated settlement costs with regard to liability issues that may have arisen as a result of some of these fires. So another perspective actually that we can apply to this, another lens, if you will, we can apply to the wildfire issue would be greenhouse gas emissions, which surely is a topic of great importance in today's world. So throughout the last 5 years, it's been recorded that US wildfires have emitted between round figures 200 to 300 million tons of greenhouse gases. To give a little perspective to that, we've associated it to the US auto fleet GHG emissions on an annual basis. And you'll see that for the most part, somewhere between 10 and 20+% of the US auto fleet GHG emissions are equated, if you will, by the US wildfire GHG emissions. So to take that just a little bit farther and put a finer point on that, I took a look at the 2019 data in this case and realized that 276 million total vehicles were registered in the United States. So if we apply this 10 to 20+% factor of wildfires versus the automobile emissions, you'll see that wildfires in essence equate in GHG emissions to approximately 27 million to 59 million vehicles per year. These are the same vehicles, of course, we're trying to retire through time by adopting electric vehicles in their replace. So a few years ago, during the Obama administration, there was this entry of social cost of carbon being introduced into the marketplace, and there was a dollar per metric ton associated at that time of $51, and this was ultimately a fee, if you will, or a tax perhaps, that was applied to organizations, companies that were considered greenhouse gas emitters. And so there's this existing metric that the Biden administration, I understand, is now revising and planning to change this value. I'm assuming that $51 per metric ton is going to be elevated, but I don't know that. That's merely a supposition. But if we look at the monetary aspect from the social cost of carbon concept, you can see that during the last 5 years, nearly $56 billion worth of greenhouse gas emissions has occurred as a result of wildfires. But if the monetary side of that doesn't appeal to you, perhaps just the raw stats themselves will. The last 5 years have accumulated in excess of 1.1 trillion metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. So if at the end of the day, we're very concerned about greenhouse gas emissions and vehicles being retired for electric and solar rooftop being brought in and coal retired and all these good things, then I think it's incredibly fair to say that we need to really pay attention to the impact that wildfires are creating in this regard as well. So to give a little more validity to this, you can be rest assured, if you will, that not only local and state governments, but even the federal government clearly are spending a tremendous amount of time and attention, if you will, with respect to wildfire mitigation, et cetera. And it was the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, which was passed into law in 2021, that has set aside now billions of grant dollars being available for wildfire mitigation practices. So that's kind of setting the stage, if you will, to the reality. And what I'd like to do now is transfer right over to the important point today, at least from a selfish perspective, which is the value of grid-wide fire spy. So grid-wide fire spy, gang, is a suite of specially designed sensors, as I mentioned earlier before, that contain a combination of environmental, atmospheric, and grid monitoring capabilities, all self-contained within each individual sensor. Those three areas of monitoring can occur. So what we're really creating here is the concept of leveraging overhead transformers, single or polyphase for that matter, with these specially designed sensing capabilities that will then provide an always-on 24/7, 365 public safety protection network throughout the communities upon which we deploy. This will create an outdoor overhead monitoring canopy that will provide early detection and auto alert capability for the communities, again, upon which these deployments are achieved. Because we are uniquely leveraging our legacy technology of advanced transformer infrastructure, in addition to the atmospheric and environmental sensing capabilities, we have the ability, which I think is very novel and unique, to provide wildfire prevention capability. And the way we do that is by monitoring grid assets and providing grid operators with the ability to see existing intragrid issues and or foresee manifesting grid asset failures that may be developing, the kinds of failures that result, unfortunately, at times in asset fires and potentially igniting wildfires. Because these sensors will already be strategically deployed throughout communities, we will be providing vital situational awareness to authorities when unpreventable public safety events, wildfires, are unfolding as a result of perhaps grid asset failures, or more commonly, Mother Nature, lightning strikes as an example, or even cases such as arson. Regardless of the source of the fire, the vital situational awareness capability will be able to be performed by the existing sensors being deployed on the transformer assets. And then for those of you who may be familiar with the US federal government's 25-year contract that they have in place with AT&T to provide, a dedicated cellular band available only to utility grid operators and first responder community members when a localized disaster occurs, the grid-wide Fire Spy Gen 1 device has been FirstNet Ready certified And right now, literally as we speak, our Gen 2 devices, the full suite, is about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through the first net certification process and will end in the next 30 days. So by going down this trail, we believe that grid-wide fire spy will indeed produce an innovative, novel wildfire mitigation and public safety solution. So let's move on here. I got to keep moving this little bar around. All right, so let's look at the solution architecture. And you'll notice, I hope, that it's actually very simple. And that's literally by design. Keeping it simple is part of our mantra. So what we're looking at here is the idea of deploying these specially designed sensors, again, on overhead single phase or polyphase transformers, having each of these fully self-contained devices sending their field data, typically through cellular network, back through a virtual private network to a secure head-end environment. And once the data is in that head-end environment, it is made available to the authorized users, utility operators, first responders, et cetera, through a web graphical user interface, and/or is seamlessly interfaced with existing utility operator platforms or first responder operator platforms for that matter. So we can literally move the data very quickly so that it is available to the necessary authorities in the event that these sensors are detecting conditions in the environment that warrant notification. So you'll see, I've referenced a few times actually about our legacy advanced transformer infrastructure technology. This solution architecture that you're looking at is exactly the one that we have been using for the last decade for advanced transformer infrastructure. And you'll see in the gold box, for example, the levels of data and stats that we've accumulated with that system, over 16 million logins, over 1.1 million auto alerts having already been provided to utility operators for our legacy technology. And then again, this grid-wide fire spy is going to operate and ride on the exact same chassis as what we've done historically for the last decade. So the grid-wide fire spy single phase device has been purposefully designed using a patented form factor to allow utility operators, you see over here on the left-hand side, to be able to literally install these devices in a total of 5 to 7 minutes. That includes elevating the bucket, attaching the device to the transformer, lowering the bucket and stepping out. Routinely, this is done with our legacy form factor and is certainly achievable with the same form factor that we're using for grid-wide fire spy. So it's a very fast deployment capability. There is no need to de-energize the transformers during this installation process, which means there's no customer interruption downstream. So we simply deploy and move to the next location, redeploy, and onward we go. The next example would be the polyphase view. So yes, it takes a little bit longer, but still a very fast, if you will, installation process. Same story as the single phase environment, no need to de-energize the transformers or the grid in any way, therefore creating no customer interruption, which becomes very important in the polyphase market because these transformer situations are typically assigned to commercial and industrial locations, et cetera, where interruption, institutions for that matter as well, where interruption could be really critical. So again, the design of the product is to keep us away from having to create those kinds of impacts for the downstream users. So let's dig in a little bit to grid-wide fire spy's uniqueness. I mentioned several times here that it's built on top of the legacy advanced transformer infrastructure technology, but what we've done is added into the sensor suite these outdoor sensing capabilities that are listed here on your screen. So you'll see the very first one indicates infrared sensing arrays. So we've installed infrared sensing capabilities on each of the two corners and one in the center, which is tilted forward. Each of the angles are specifically designed to give us maximum coverage footprint, which is illustrated a bit over here on the right side, and I'll come back to that. But in addition to having the infrared sensing capability, which allows us to appropriately and accurately identify ground and surface temperature changes, we also have on board these devices ambient temperature sensing capability, outdoor smoke and gas sensing capability, and humidity sensing capability. We will be able to add others we've specifically designed in order to achieve that. But those that we have listed right now are indicative inherently of wildfire type conditions, whether it's one or more than one. So any one of these areas, when we detect in the field, these conditions, if you will, that are outside of an expected tolerance, automated alerts are sent to the authorized users, and I'll explain that a bit more in a few seconds. But I do want to just mention over here with regard to the estimated fields of view. Again, this has been developed through different testing on the angles upon which we will have these infrared sensors deployed inside each device. But all transformers are not at the same height in the field. They're typically, it seems, between 30 to 40 feet. So the higher up you go, inherently, you would recognize the larger the field of view or footprint that we have with regard to being able to see the ground and understanding through infrared sensing the temperature changes that may be occurring. I'll move us on here as soon as I come back. There we go. All right, so early detection and auto alerts. Using a lot of experience from our advanced transformer infrastructure legacy technology, we really learned how that technology could begin to facilitate asset fire protection and wildfire mitigation. And that is what really years ago precipitated part of our movement in this direction to create grid-wide fire spy. So because we're on the grid, uniquely monitoring, again, the atmospheric and environmental conditions on top of the intragrid conditions, we have this very, I believe, again, unique situation where we can provide information associated with occurrences that are happening within the grid that may be indicative of problems that utilities need to be aware of as quickly as possible and need to be able to take action upon. So in this case, down conductors, and layperson's terms, a live wire that gets toward the ground, that dislodges and heads toward the ground. That is very much a problematic situation for utilities. And even with lots of technology being deployed today in an effort to try to improve or accelerate the ability for utility operators to recognize that a down conductor incident is occurring, it's still estimated that round figures 30 to 50% of down conductors just are not picked up by today's technologies. And in essence, it requires people to just call in and report the problem. Well, this is a great example that, again, our legacy technology had picked up on, which is what in part fueled the direction of grid-wide fire spy. But what you're looking at right here is an incident that occurred in June of 2020. And as Murphy's Law works, this was a case where between 3 and 3:15 a.m., you can see where my pointer is here, all of a sudden, voltage dropped out substantially in the circuit feeder that we had just coincidentally been in the process of monitoring with multiple advanced transformer infrastructure devices. In this particular case, what did happen is a primary side conductor that was on a pole contiguous to us being downstream on the secondary side of a transformer, a polyphase in this case. The conductor let loose, dropped into the forest canopy, burned its way through all the way to the forest floor, created a wildfire that was unfortunately going on for hours because it was in a somewhat remote area at the time it had begun. And again, it's happening in the middle of the night. Nobody's out to see it. And this thing just starts going. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the statistic, but in essence, wildfire doubles every minute. So getting after things quickly is important. Well, back in this 2020 era, we still were not even aware that our devices could pick up this kind of activity from the primary side impact. So as we autopsied the situation, we realized that this data was captured by not only the polyphase device that was contiguous to this location, but downstream we had a single phase device that was similarly picking up the voltage drops that had occurred. So back in 2020, we did not have any alerting capability assigned to this type of extreme condition happening within a grid. But as you obviously will now imagine, we've changed that and created an entire critical sensing capability that aligns with this and some other features that I'll touch on here in a moment. The importance here is allowing utility operators to have a quicker notification of an instance rather than unfortunately having a fire, or in this case, a wildfire, develop hours before ultimately the utility may be notified. So we want to get people after the problem much more quickly for the obvious reasons, I trust. All right, so in addition, Grid-wide Fire Spy has the ability to also provide outage notification capability. Again, here we are mounted on transformers. In this case, we're specifically mounted on overhead transformers. What you're looking at is a map of one of our customers, and you'll see icons, triangular icons that are white, some that are green, and one that is red. Those that are white are some of our older legacy advanced transformer technology. Those that are green are our newer advanced transformer infrastructure technology. The newer contain last gasp capability, which allows for outage notification to be provided. And the Grid-wide Fire Spy solution exactly utilizes the same technology, but just adds the atmospheric and environmental sensing capability, as I've mentioned a few times. So the value of this is really stemming from the very basic understanding that not all transformers fail nicely. Some of them just go out, okay, good. But some of them unfortunately don't just go out. Some of them literally catch fire. That becomes, of course, an asset fire. That, of course, wrong day, wrong time, Murphy's Law working against us here, can certainly put us in a position where a wildfire can occur. And the worst thing is what I just showed you with the down conductors, where it happens in the middle of the night and in essence, nobody sees it till it really gets roaring, which is something we don't want to happen. So by providing outage notification to utility operators, we have the ability to accelerate the response time and the restoration time, but also to discover problems if indeed they are actually occurring. So the key here really, and we've learned this by observing a little bit about what's going on with AMI for the last decade. It's certainly conceivable to provide utility operators, or any party for that matter, with too much information. And we definitely have the ability with our sensors to provide all kinds of information for utility operators to use in all types of departments throughout their organization. But in the specific case of Grid-wide Fire Spy, what we're really focusing on here is bubbling up the actionable data to the top. In essence, alerts where they're necessary. So what we've done is categorized our alerting capability into two areas of standard alert or critical alert. So standard alerts are typically the out of tolerance, beyond expectation conditions inside a grid, whether it be such as those you're seeing here: high, low voltage, high current, transformer temp, transformer overloading, and outage notifications themselves. These are for the most part grid operating conditions. When they go out of tolerance, we have the ability to provide standard alerting to the operators, and we do that through SMS text and/or email. That is the choice of the authorized users of which ways they wish to receive these notifications. But now that we've brought forward the atmospheric and environmental sensing capabilities, which becomes Grid-wide Fire Spy, we do deliver critical alert capability as well. And that means when we find excessive or high or low voltages, low being such as the one I just showed you with the down conductor, all the way down to an excessive ground temperature, outdoor smoke gas being detected, humidity drops, what have you, those are, in our view, critical alerts, and again, immediately dispatched to the authorized users through SMS text and/or email. Any of these notifications are capable of being remotely configured and reconfigured through the course of time over the years of lifespan of this product. So it's really set it and forget it. But if there are changing conditions in an environment for whatever particular reason over the course of time, the operators, of course, again, have the ability to remotely make changes so that they can align with those changing nuances. So prevention. Because we're uniquely in the grid and on the grid and understanding some conditions that are occurring within the intragrid, it really does posture us, I think, in a novel way to help facilitate a prevention aspect to Grid-wide Fire Spy. So I did see this little message up on the top right of the screen where the Australian government had recently done some investigation and found out that round figures 15% of the wildfires that they were studying had in fact been triggered by electricity grid asset failures. So at the end of the day, albeit only 15%, every fire, every wildfire surely is a problem that we want to make sure doesn't happen if we can prevent it. So that's really where we're trying to go with some of this technology that we're bringing to bear through Grid-Wide Fire Spy. So I've got this series of items listed here: asset load monitoring, which is very important because we're now seeing substantial overload conditions developing in grids. And a lot of that is driven by EV charging stations that were, in essence, they are an unplanned load 1, 2, 3 decades ago when many of our transformers were deployed. Lots of these grid edge impacts were not necessarily imagined were going to happen. Well, EV charging stations create one of those unplanned, if you will, substantial grid edge impacts. We also have solar rooftop now driving reverse energy up into transformers, for which, quite frankly, most of our transformers never even designed or conceived to handle reverse energy. Now, we're not only producing reverse energy into them, but we're literally providing reduced energy overload into these transformers, for which we've got tons of stats and statistics in our world that we've accumulated over the years to substantiate that. So again, end of life indicators, empirically based oversight, if you will, is what's very important here, where we're not providing guesses and we're not providing time-based maintenance issues. We're providing empirical data that allows utilities to recognize assets that are, in essence, overburdened and perhaps preparing for failure in a premature fashion. So this is an example, one of many that we could show you, but for the sake of the day, we're keeping it down to just a few. But this is an example of our advanced transformer infrastructure detecting both forward and reverse energy impacts in a grid. So what you see here are colorized icons, which each are bearing our advanced transformer infrastructure legacy technology that all have the same abilities that Grid-Wide Fire Spy does, except Grid-Wide Fire Spy, again, brings the atmospheric and environmental sensing to the bear as well. But the purple icons that you're seeing are instances where reverse energy had been detected at each of these transformer points throughout the last 24 hours. Those that are yellow or red are actually reverse energy instances that exceeded the capacity or the nameplate of the transformer. And red is typically an indicator that there was a substantial overload situation that had occurred. So in this particular case, what you're seeing is a 25 kVA transformer that is actually handling over 47.5 reverse energy kVA. So that should catch someone's attention. But we put this into a graph space here, and what you begin to see is the gold indicators are forward energy overload, just load and overload for that matter, and the purple are reverse load and overload. And I say overload in particular because you'll see that in relation to the nameplate capacity of this particular transformer, and we can show countless examples of these situations, this transformer is now experiencing an overload on almost a daily basis, but it's experiencing a reverse overload of massive significance, upwards of over 150% of the capacity of this transformer on an almost daily basis. So we believe that is really important information, if you will, for utilities. And I'll give you a great example of that as soon as we switch screens here, and that's this case. So in this case, what you're looking at is one of our legacy devices that was indeed on a transformer that caught fire. The photo that you're seeing here, admittedly, is a stock photo. It is not the specific example upon which this device had been deployed, but it surely is the perfect visual to give us an idea of what some of these transformers that don't feel nicely really look like. However, each of these 4 panels of information that I have here, and no need to go into them individually per se, but they are all the kinds of intra-grid analytics data, if you will, that we're pulling from the grid that allows us to understand and report to utility operators assets that are showing signs that could be leading to end of life, premature failure, or conditions that ultimately result in this fire type scenario here. So again, all of these 4 panels were on the exact transformer that this particular advanced transformer infrastructure sensor was on when it went up in flames. And so what we're really suggesting is with the use of this kind of visibility into understanding what's happening with transformer assets, we begin to put utility operators in a position to empirically understand when maintenance is going to be required, as opposed to just simply sticking with, what has historically been a time-based approach. So this particular slide, admittedly, is a lot, and I can't quite get everything out of the way here. But what it's designed to show you is this, and bear with me as I go through a couple of things here. This is a situation where a holding company owns 3 separate utilities, Acme A, Acme B, and Acme C. We've rolled up Acme in total to give a general sense of the business case that would be associated with a grid-wide fire spy deployment. So in this particular, this is a real utility, by the way, real holding company, real utilities, et cetera. But in this case, what we've done is forecast a 50% deployment, meaning 50% of their overhead transformer fleet would receive a grid-wide fire spy sensor being deployed upon it. In that case, what would happen across the 15-year lifespan of grid-wide fire spy is we would cause, at the end of the day, a $2 per customer per month cost factor, which we believe is pretty reasonable. If this particular utility wanted to do our maintenance and support arrangement for the lifespan of the product on top of just the basic CapEx project, we would elevate the cost to this utility, to the customers, by a nickel a month. So round figures for a 50% deployment of grid-wide fire spy throughout this particular utilities, we are looking between $2 and $2.05 per month per customer. Well, I don't know if that sounds like a lot of money or not, but let's put it into perspective. One wildfire event, the November 8th, 2018 Camp Fire, which admittedly was the event that motivated me and our company to say, this has got to stop. We need to take action here. So in that particular event, $25.5 billion worth of total costs and damages occurred from one wildfire event, resulting in 85 fatalities, over $150 million for that one event to suppress that wildfire. 5,600 firefighters engaged in that event, 30,000 buildings in total destroyed, and greenhouse gas emissions from one event around 4 million metric tons. This was, again, the wildfire that made us say, this has just got to stop. So when we took a look at 25.5 billion and we amortized that against the just under 2.9 million customers that make up this particular utility service area, that mathematically works out to repay just $25.5 billion from one event. That's $49 per month for every customer for every month of 15 years. That's what it costs. So our theory is it worth spending $49 per month per every customer after the event and all of the devastation and travesty? Or are we better off to invest $2 a month for 24/7, 365 proactive early detection, auto alerts, prevention, and ongoing situational awareness capability? We think it's a pretty obvious choice, but I'm sure that's not the case with everybody, and we understand that. So in our view, which again, we're as biased as the day is long, and I can admit that to anybody, but at the end of the day, I do think that we stand on our own here with respect to demonstrating the value. We believe that grid-wide fire spy definitely presents an affordable multi-value solution. We do provide an elevated public safety protection through this kind of a deployment approach. This grid-wide fire spy aligns with our changing times because it allows not only for environmental and atmospheric monitoring, but also ongoing grid monitoring at a time when we're doing things at the grid edge that we never even imagined 10 or 20 years ago. And at the same time that our grid infrastructure is indeed aging. So as I just demonstrated, we can produce an investment value potential of up to 24 to 1, which we think is kind of almost mind-blowing. That, in our view, sets the stage for regulator and stakeholder approvals to be secured. We simultaneously develop through CapEx projects revenue growth for the utilities, whether they do or do not involve grant monies from the federal government or not. That'll be seen. We'll see how that pulls itself out through time. Certainly, we yield environmental gains. We protect the necessary tax revenues of local communities by keeping fires small when they happen or preventing fires from happening at all. What we cannot allow to happen is the local economies to be devastated, because when they're devastated, the tax revenues are devastated and everything goes sideways in a community. That's what creates budget burdens at the local, state, and now even at the federal level. And we believe Grid-wide Fire Spy has the ability to reverse those kinds of trends. So in our view, hope really is now replaced with Grid-wide Fire Spy. By leveraging existing grid infrastructure to gain proactive, preventive, empirical data, we provide this always-on 24/7, 365 public safety protection network that is deployed literally right where all of us live, work, and play. That's where the distribution grid exists. That's what we're leveraging to our advantage. This provides us the ability to achieve early detection auto alerts, as mentioned, promptly revealing grid asset failures, therefore setting the stage for prevention capability, obviously providing the vital situational awareness for authorities, and collectively saving lives, saving local economies, and saving the environment within which we all live. So to close us out, Grid-wide Fire Spy provides always-on monitoring, creating a community-wide defense solution, benefiting utility operators, first responders, and literally all stakeholders. In our view, Grid-wide Fire Spy uniquely provides this growing list of value propositions that is indicated here on the screen. And that's really what sets the stage, in our view, for making the grid our wildfire mitigation ally, preventing grid asset-induced fires and keeping unpreventable fires small so that they do not become the disasters that we've been continuing to watch unfold year after year. And that's the end of the show. Randy, back to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Alan. Good presentation. Let's take some time for some questions. We have several. Number one, are the GFS devices designed for harsh weather conditions?
Yes, as a matter of fact, they're really the same form factor that we've used with advanced transformer infrastructure, which we have been in virtually every climate in the world, from the Asia Pacific to Latin America to the Caribbean to Canada, throughout all of North America for that matter. We've been pretty much everywhere, and we've done that deliberately, of course, to make sure that we're ruggedized the way we think we are. And yes, the answer is we're in good shape there, and we've got the advanced transformer infrastructure legacy background to prove it. This form factor simply is building right with that.
Okay. Are there any foreseeable communication threats via the internet for these devices?
No, everything is run through virtual private network. There's no public access whatsoever involved. Your IP addresses are all private, and all the data is encrypted. So we're running on cellular backhaul, as I mentioned, almost all the time. It is really the vision here. That has been the basis of our success. And so we do not necessarily see any threats in that regard. Although, if there's a lack of access to data as a result of a massive fire taking out towers and things of that nature, I can't predict that is going to occur. But through the general operating situation here, we do not see any threats of that nature that concern us.
Okay, next question. Is the system incorporating 3G, 4G, 5G? Will you be going to 6G?
All right, so 3G has been already retired in the United States. It's being retired throughout other portions of North America, and over the next several years, it'll be retired more globally. So we're evolving away certainly from 3G. We've had LTE comms in our devices for the last 3.5 to 4 years at least, perhaps even longer now that I think about it. So we're using forms of LTE, Cat-M, Cat-1. We're not necessarily incorporating 5G on purpose because it really brings forward a substantial escalation in cost, and it's not a speed that we need to have. So our vision has been working with the lowest cost technology that we can, that's got the longest runway of longevity, if you will, going forward. And that's why we're embracing Cat M and Cat 1 technologies at present, but we can certainly evolve through time as the needs warrant.
Okay, how many years can this device be in operation before it's upgraded and replaced?
Well, the devices are designed similar to our advanced transformer infrastructure to be in the field up to 15 years, but by their sheer design, over-the-air upgrade capability is already here. So this is a deployment one time. These units are all maintenance free. There are no batteries involved whatsoever. They're self-contained in the way of the comms being on board as well. If we need to do upgrades of any nature, troubleshooting of any nature, and or if utility operators or other users find the need to make adjustments to the alerts, like I mentioned earlier, whatever alerts that they may be, we can change all of that remotely through over-the-air capabilities by design.
Okay, do you find that utilities tend to run pole top transformers to failure rather than replace after, say, 30, 40 years, or perform diagnostic tests?
Well, that's a pretty interesting question, actually. I would say, and I'm just going to give my opinion here. I don't have this statistically that I could validate at the moment, but I would say after 10 to 11 years in this industry now, it seems to me that there's typically about a 1 to perhaps 2% annual retirement of pole top transformers. That may happen with some or most utilities, but that has been a time-based approach historically. And what we do now is put utilities in a position to be able to appropriately leverage the maximum usability, if you will, of these transformers by using empirical-based information. So rather than time-based, it's really empirical database management for replacements. So in many cases, we'll find that transformers need to come out early because they have been overburdened, overloaded too long, and they're showing signs toward failure. In other instances, there are going to be transformers that are underloaded and have lots of years of life left where they may otherwise be retired because they were out there, quote unquote, long enough. So the advanced transformer infrastructure and grid-wide fire spy combination allows utility operators to improve that paradigm on how they're going to maintain any transformers in addition to the pole top, which you're focused on specifically here with grid-wide fire spy.
Okay, and a comment. Another advantage of your system is that the utility can claim that they took remedial action to minimize the risk of wildfires and hopefully limit their liability exposure.
That is a very astute comment by somebody, and they're totally on board. They get it, and I appreciate that, and I'm thankful that somebody did recognize that. So part of our value is helping to reduce corporate liability. And I'm very convinced, especially as you look at the instance that just occurred in California last week with these mega $1 million homes being destroyed. And that's not just that example. There have been many examples in addition to that one. But the insurance industry is definitely going to assert itself because they're dealing with tremendous losses here associated with wildfires. And we believe we're introducing an innovative solution that's going to allow utilities to take that proactive action, that remedial action that whomever that was just commented on, and therefore demonstrate that the utility in essence is quote unquote doing all they can do. Mother Nature can create some problems, but if you can either do all you can do or you can choose to not do all you can do. We believe we're going to facilitate the ability for utilities to quote unquote do all they can do. We believe the insurance industry is going to recognize and reward utility operators for that kind of proactive action as well. So I think it's just upside after upside, quite honestly.
Great. Okay, well, that's it for the questions. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Alan. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks.